The first thing I felt was cold so sharp it seemed to have teeth. I opened my eyes to darkness, wind, and snow hitting my face sideways like handfuls of broken glass. For a few seconds, I had no idea where I was. I only knew I was lying on my side, half buried in snow with my cheek pressed against frozen ground and my fingers curled so tightly they hurt. I tried to sit up, but my arms shook beneath me. My coat was gone. My phone was gone. My purse was gone. Even my boots were missing. I was wearing a thin sweater, dark jeans, and one sock. The other foot was bare against the ice. I remember whispering, "No, no, no, no." My voice barely came out. The wind swallowed it before it reached anyone. I forced myself onto my elbows and looked around. There were no houses, no headlights, no road signs. Just trees bending under the storm and a narrow service road disappearing into white darkness. I didn't know how long I had been there. Minutes. Hours. Long enough for my thoughts to start coming apart at the edges. Then one thought cut through everything else. If I stop now, they win. I don't know why I knew that. Not fully. Not yet. But somewhere under the fear and confusion, I understood one terrible thing. I had not wandered there by accident. Someone had put me there, and whoever it was had taken everything I could use to survive. My name is Avery Bennett. I was 20, 8 years old when my family decided I was worth more gone than alive. Before that night, most people would have said I had a lucky life. I had a good job as a licensed financial planner. I lived in a clean little townhouse outside Burlington. I paid my bills on time. I sent handwritten birthday cards. I kept emergency snacks in my car. I was the boring twin, according to my sister Lillian. The responsible one, the serious one. The one who ruined fun by asking questions like, "Who is paying for this?" And "Did you read the contract before you signed it?" Lillian was born 6 minutes after me, but my parents acted like those 6 minutes made me her unpaid bodyguard for life. When we were kids, if she broke a vase, I should have stopped her. If she forgot homework, I should have reminded her. If she cried, I should have comforted her, even when I was the reason she was crying, because I had won something she wanted. My mother had one sentence she used more than any other. "Avery, can't you just let your sister have this one thing?" One thing meant my room because it had better sunlight. One thing meant the dress I bought with babysitting money. One thing meant the internship my grandfather helped me apply for because Lillian felt left out. My father was quieter about it, but worse in some ways. Richard Bennett believed love should look like obedience. If I questioned him, I was difficult. If Lillian questioned him, she was emotional. If I refused to cover for her, I was selfish. If she needed rescuing, I was expected to run. The only person who ever saw through it was my grandfather, Arthur Bennett. He was my mother's father, though he and my father never liked each other. Grandpa Arthur built the Bennett family fortune long before I was born. He owned commercial properties, farmland, investment accounts, and a small logistics company that grew faster than anyone expected. But he never talked about money like it made him important. He talked about responsibility. Money makes people louder. He told me once when I was 17. It doesn't make them wiser. He trusted me in a way my parents never did. Not because I was perfect, because I listened, because I asked what would happen to employees, tenants, and scholarships before I asked how much something was worth. When he died, I thought grief would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching my family pretend to mourn a man they had spent years waiting to inherit from. The funeral had barely ended when my father started asking about the estate. My mother kept smoothing the front of her black dress and saying, "Arthur would have wanted peace." Lillian cried loudly whenever someone looked at her, then checked her reflection in the silver coffee urn when she thought no one was watching. 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Margaret Hayes, my grandfather's attorney. She asked me to come to her office alone. Her voice was calm, but serious enough that my stomach tightened before I even got there. Margaret was in her 60s, with silver hair cut neatly at her jaw and eyes that made you want to sit up straighter. She placed a blue folder on the desk between us. "Your grandfather created a family trust years ago," she said. "Most of the major assets were moved into it before his passing." I nodded slowly. "Okay, what does that have to do with me?" She folded her hands. "You are the primary beneficiary, Avery." I stared at her. "That can't be right." "It is." "What about my mother? What about my sister?" "They are named in limited ways." but the controlling beneficial interest transfers to you once the final review is complete. My ears rang. I thought of my father's face at the funeral, the way he had shaken hands with men from the bank like he was already in charge. Do they know? Margaret paused. They know there is a trust. They do not know every term. I should have felt honored. Instead, I felt scared. Because I knew my family. And I knew there was no version of this news where they simply accepted Grandpa Arthur's decision. That night, my parents invited me to dinner. That alone should have warned me. They never invited me unless they wanted something. Their house sat on a hill with warm lights in every window, the kind of place people drove past slowly at Christmas. Inside, everything smelled like rosemary chicken and expensive candles. Lillian was already there, curled on the couch in cream, colored cashmere, looking like she had stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. There she is, she said brightly. The chosen one. My mother shot her a look. Lillian. I froze near the doorway. What does that mean? My father poured wine into 3 glasses and water into one. Mine. It means your sister has a flair for drama. Dinner was stiff. My mother kept asking about work. My father kept mentioning how complicated large estates could be. Lillian kept smiling at me in a way that made my skin prickle. Finally, my father set down his fork. Your grandfather made decisions near the end that may not reflect what he would have wanted long term. I looked at him. Grandpa was sharp until the day he died. My mother sighed. No one is attacking him. Avery? It sounds like you are. Lillian leaned back. You always do that. Turn everything into a moral trial. I looked from her to my parents. Did Margaret call you? My father's jaw tightened for half a second. That was all the answer I needed. The trust is a family matter, he said. Not something for you to handle alone. Grandpa chose how he wanted it handled. My mother's eyes flashed. Your grandfather favored you because you made him feel needed. The words hit harder than I expected. I pushed my chair back. That's not fair. No, Lillian said softly. What's not fair is acting like you're better than all of us because an old man handed you the keys. I left before dessert. I told myself they were grieving. I told myself money brought out ugly feelings. I told myself they would calm down once Margaret explained everything. I was still telling myself those lies 2 nights later when I stopped outside my father's study and heard voices behind the door. My mother sounded nervous. What if she refuses? My father answered, low and steady. Then we follow the second path. Lillian said something I couldn't catch. Then my father spoke again. Everything will finally be the way it should. I stood there with my hand hovering near the doorknob, my heart beating so hard I thought they would hear it. Then the floor creaked under my foot. The room went silent, the door opened. My father looked at me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Very, he said. We were just talking about you. My father's smile made the hallway feel colder than the storm ever could. For one breath, none of us moved. My hand was still near the door frame. My mother stood behind him with one arm folded across her waist. Lillian sat on the edge of his desk, her legs crossed, her face too calm for someone who had just been caught whispering about me. Talking about me how? I asked. My father opened the door wider. About how tense everything has become. That didn't sound like tension. My mother gave me the tired look she used when she wanted me to feel childish. Avery, please. Your grandfather's death has been hard on everyone. Lillian laughed under her breath. Especially on the person who inherited everything? I looked at her. I didn't ask for this. You never ask? She said. Things just fall into your lap, and then we're all supposed to clap. My father stepped into the hall and gently guided the door closed behind him, cutting off the room like there was something inside I was not allowed to see. This is exactly why we need time together, he said. No attorneys, no paperwork, no accusations, just family. I almost laughed. Family in our house usually meant everyone pretending Lillian had been hurt while I apologized for bleeding. But I was tired. Tired from grief, tired from suspicion. Tired from carrying the weight of being the only one willing to say what was happening out loud. So when my mother suggested a weekend at a winter lodge near Stowe, I did not immediately say no. She described it like something soft and harmless. Snow, fireplaces, quiet dinners, the 4 of us away from calls and legal meetings. Your grandfather always loved Vermont in winter, she said. Maybe it would be good for us. Lillian reached for my hand. That was what made me hesitate. We had been close once, before my parents turned every difference between us into a contest. When we were little, we slept in the same bed during thunderstorms. We traded Halloween candy by color, not value. She used to call me Ave because she said Avery sounded too grown up. For half a second, I saw that girl again. Please, Lillian said. I don't want money to be the thing that ruins us. I should have heard the performance in it. I should have noticed how my father watched me instead of her, measuring whether the line worked. But I wanted, stupidly and desperately, to believe there was still a piece of my family worth saving. I said yes. The morning we left, the sky was pale and heavy. My father insisted on driving his SUV because mine wasn't built for mountain roads, even though my car had handled Vermont winters for 6 years. My mother packed snacks in a canvas tote. Lillian arrived last, wearing white boots that had clearly never touched slush and carrying only a designer overnight bag. You look nervous, she said as I climbed into the back seat beside her. I'm fine. You always say that when you're not. It almost sounded like concern. Almost. My father glanced at us in the rearview mirror. Let's make this a peaceful weekend. For the first hour, everyone behaved. My mother asked about clients at work. Lillian showed me pictures of a gallery opening she had attended. My father talked about weather conditions like he was narrating a public radio segment. But the longer we drove, the stranger things felt. My father took 2 phone calls through the car's Bluetooth, both times switching to his handset and lowering his voice. My mother kept checking a leather folder in her bag, then sliding it deeper when she saw me looking. Lillian asked casual questions that were not casual at all. So when does the trust review actually finish? She asked. I looked out the window at the snow-covered fields. Margaret said soon. Soon like weeks. Days? Why? She shrugged. I'm just trying to understand what happens next. Margaret can explain it to all of us when she's ready. Lillian's mouth tightened. Of course. Because Margaret tells you everything. My mother turned from the front seat. Avery, don't make this difficult. Your sister has a right to understand her own family's future. Then she can ask the attorney. My father's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Attorneys are not family. No, I said quietly. But they do write things down. The car went silent after that. We reached the lodge around dusk. It was smaller than my mother had described, tucked off a private road with only a few cabins spaced between dark pines. The main building glowed amber through the snow, pretty in a way that should have comforted me. Instead, I felt my stomach twist. My father checked us in while my mother stayed too close to me, asking if I was hungry, tired, cold. Lillian disappeared for nearly 20 minutes and returned without explaining where she had gone. Dinner was in a dining room with antler chandeliers and windows black with storm clouds. The snow had thickened. The server mentioned road closures were possible overnight. My father only smiled and said, "Then we'll have no choice but to enjoy each other's company." My mother poured hot cider from a small, insulated bottle she had brought from home. She handed 1 mug to Lillian, 1 to my father, and 1 to me. Your favorite? She said. Cinnamon, orange peel, clove. The smell pulled me back to childhood so fast it hurt. Grandpa Arthur used to make cider on Christmas Eve. He would let me stir the pot while Lillian stole marshmallows meant for cocoa. I took the mug because refusing felt rude, and because part of me still wanted my mother's kindness to be real. The first sip tasted sweeter than I remembered. Too sweet. Did you add something? I asked. My mother smiled. Just honey. Lillian looked down at her mug and did not drink. That was the first moment fear truly moved through me, not suspicion. Fear. I set my cup down. Lillian, why aren't you drinking yours? She blinked. I'm not in the mood. My father leaned back. Avery. My name sounded like a warning. I stood too quickly, and the room tilted. The chandelier stretched into long lines of light. I grabbed the table edge. What did you do? My mother stood reaching for me. You're exhausted? Don't touch me, Lillian whispered. Dad. My knees weakened. I tried to step back, but my body no longer listened correctly. Sounds came from far away, a chair scraping, my mother saying my name, my father telling someone not to panic. I remember Lillian's face above mine, pale and shining, not with guilt but with fear that something might go wrong. My father's voice cut through the blur. By morning, There will only be one Heir. I tried to answer. I tried to scream. But the last thing I saw before the room went black was my twin sister looking at me like I was already gone. When I opened my eyes again, I thought I was dead. Everything was white. White ceiling. White lights. White blankets tucked around me so tightly I could barely move. A steady beeping filled the room, followed by the quiet hiss of warm air from a nearby vent. It took several seconds before I realized I wasn't looking at heaven. I was looking at a hospital ceiling. My mouth felt like sandpaper. Every muscle in my body ached, especially my hands and feet. I tried to lift my arm, but a knife line tugged against my skin. A woman wearing navy blue scrubs looked up from a computer screen across the room and hurried over the moment she saw my eyes open. "Easy," she said gently. "You've been through severe hypothermia." My lips barely moved. "Where?" "University Medical Center." She smiled with obvious relief. "You've been unconscious for almost 19 hours. 19 hours. My mind immediately jumped to my parents. To Lillian. To the lodge. "My family?" I whispered. "Can you call my family?" The nurse's expression changed so quickly it frightened me. She looked toward the hallway before answering. "There's someone waiting to speak with you first." Before I could ask another question, the door opened. A woman in a charcoal gray suit stepped inside, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked to be in her early 50s, calm in the way only people with years of difficult experience become calm. "Ms. Bennett?" she asked. I nodded weakly. "I'm Detective Laura Mercer with the Vermont State Police." My stomach tightened. Detectives never brought good news. She pulled a chair beside the bed but didn't sit immediately. Instead, she studied my face as though making sure I understood what she was about to hear. "Before we begin," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something important. Do you know today's date?" I answered correctly. "Do you know who you are?" "Oh, of course I do." "Good." She finally sat down. "Because according to several official documents filed this morning," she opened her portfolio and slid a sheet of paper across my blanket. "You are deceased." I stared at the page. At first, the words refused to make sense. Then they did. "Temporary certificate of presumed death." My own name sat at the top. Avery Rose Bennett. "Caused presumed exposure during severe winter conditions." I looked back at Detective Mercer. "This is a mistake." "I know." "Who filed this?" She hesitated only a moment. "Your parents initiated the emergency paperwork after reporting that you disappeared during the storm." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Disappeared?" "They told search teams you wandered away from the lodge after becoming emotionally distressed." I laughed once. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "That's a lie." I suspected as much. She leaned forward slightly. "The man who found you says you weren't anywhere near the hiking trails." Images rushed back into my head. Snow. Darkness. The numbness spreading through my body before everything disappeared. "Someone moved me," I whispered. "Someone left me there." Detective Mercer didn't interrupt. She simply wrote something in a notebook resting on her knee. "Do you remember who?" I closed my eyes. "My father holding the steering wheel." My mother's smile as she handed me the cider. Lillian staring at her untouched cup. Then my father's voice. "By morning, there will only be one Heir." My eyes snapped open. "My parents." The detective remained perfectly still. "Can you explain?" I told her everything I remembered. The family dinner. The trip, the strange questions about the trust, the cider, the dizziness, the final sentence before darkness swallowed me. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she closed her notebook carefully. "There's something else you should know." I already hated those words. "After your family reported you missing, they returned to town very quickly." "Why?" "They said there was nothing more they could do." My throat tightened. "Did they even look for me?" She didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything. A knock interrupted us. Detective Mercer stood and opened the door. Margaret Hayes walked in carrying 2 thick folders pressed tightly against her chest. The moment she saw me awake, relief flooded her face. "Thank God." She hurried to the bedside. "Margaret." She took my hand carefully, avoiding the Ive line. "I tried calling you yesterday morning. When no one answered, I contacted your parents. Richard told me you had passed away." My heart dropped all over again. "He actually said that?" She nodded slowly. Sounded devastated. Detective Mercer glanced toward Margaret. "You said on the phone there was an urgent legal concern." Margaret inhaled slowly before opening the larger folder. "There is." She removed several documents and placed them neatly across the hospital tray. About 3 hours after filing the missing person report, Richard Bennett requested emergency activation of the succession clause within the Bennett family trust. I frowned. Already? Yes? That's impossible. Ordinarily. Yes. Margaret adjusted her glasses. But because your family claimed there was overwhelming evidence that you could not have survived the storm, they petitioned for immediate review. My breathing became shallow. And the review hasn't been completed. Why not? Margaret looked directly into my eyes. Because your grandfather anticipated that someone might eventually try to manipulate the trust. Detective Mercer slowly folded her arms. Manipulate. Margaret nodded once. Arthur Bennett included several protective conditions that remain confidential until specific circumstances occur. My head spun. Never told me. It didn't tell anyone. Before I could ask another question. The television mounted high on the wall automatically switched from a local weather report to the afternoon news. None of us paid attention until I heard the anchor say my name. Every head turned toward the screen. There stood my father outside the Bennett estate wearing a black overcoat, one arm wrapped protectively around my mother. Lillian stood beside them dressed in dark clothing, tears glistening beneath perfectly applied makeup. A reporter held out a microphone. Mr. Bennett, how is your family coping with this unimaginable loss? My father lowered his head before answering. Our daughter Avery loved this family more than anything. We only hope her legacy will continue through those she loved most. The camera shifted slightly. Lillian reached up and wiped away a tear. She always wanted what was best for all of us, she whispered. Watching her speak felt like watching a stranger wear my sister's face. I had known Lillian could be selfish. I had known she could be jealous. But I had never imagined she could stand in front of cameras and help bury me while I was still breathing. Margaret quietly picked up the remote and muted the television. The room fell into complete silence. Then she reached into the second folder and removed a sealed cream-colored envelope with my grandfather's handwriting across the front. She rested it gently on the blanket. 6 words were written in black ink. For Avery, if the impossible happens. I looked from the envelope to Margaret, my hands beginning to tremble. When was this written? Her voice was barely above a whisper. The week your grandfather signed the final version of the family trust. Why didn't you give it to me before? Because he instructed me not to. I swallowed hard. What else did he know? Margaret looked at Detective Mercer before answering. I think the better question is what he was trying to protect you from. I stared at the envelope without opening it. Somehow, I already knew that whatever waited inside was going to change everything I believed about my family. The envelope felt heavier than paper should feel. I held it in both hands while the hospital room stayed silent around me. Detective Mercer stood near the door, giving me space but watching carefully. Margaret sat beside my bed with her folder open, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. My grandfather's handwriting stared back at me. For Avery, if the impossible happens. I slid one finger beneath the flap and opened it. Inside was a single letter and a small card with a password written in black ink. The letter smelled faintly like cedar, the way Grandpa Arthur's office always had. I unfolded it slowly because part of me wanted to delay whatever truth waited there. Avery, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong in a way I hoped never would. I stopped after the first line. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Margaret whispered, "Take your time." I kept reading. I did not leave the trust to you because you were my favorite. I left it to you because you were the only one who understood that money is not a prize. It is a responsibility. Your parents will not see it that way. Your sister may not either. My eyes burned, but I forced myself to continue. Your father asked too many questions in my final year. Not about my health. Not about my wishes. About timing. About control. About what would happen if the first beneficiary could no longer receive her interest. I looked up. Detective Mercer's expression sharpened. Your grandfather wrote that. I nodded and kept reading aloud because suddenly I needed someone else to hear it. If my suspicions were wrong, this letter would never matter. If they were right, the trust contains a safeguard they cannot override. Margaret reached into her folder and removed a small silver drive sealed in plastic. I left this with me as well. What is it? I asked. A recorded statement and trust archive. He gave strict instructions that it should only be opened if a questionable death or disappearance affected the succession clause. Detective Mercer stepped closer. Questionable death or disappearance. That is very specific. Margaret nodded. Arthur was specific about everything. She opened her laptop on the rolling hospital tray and inserted the drive. The screen asked for the password from the card. My hands were shaking too badly, so Margaret typed it in. A folder appeared labeled Final Safeguard. Inside were several documents, audio files, and one video. Margaret clicked the video. My grandfather appeared on screen sitting at his old desk, the green banker's lamp glowing beside him. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. "Avery," he said, and hearing his voice nearly broke me. "If this recording has been opened, then someone has tried to use your absence to gain control of the trust." I covered my mouth with one hand. He continued. "I do not know how far they went. I only know greed makes people patient, and your father has been patient for a very long time." Detective Mercer wrote that down. Margaret watched the screen without blinking. Grandpa Arthur explained that the trust contained a hidden protective clause. If the primary beneficiary died, disappeared, became incapacitated, or was declared legally dead under suspicious circumstances, the trust would not pass automatically to the next beneficiary. It would freeze. A third-party investigation would begin. Every document, timeline, communication, and medical report connected to the triggering event would be reviewed before even $1 moved. My father did not know that. My mother did not know that. Lillian did not know that. The only people who had been told were Margaret and a private investigator named Daniel Brooks, who had worked with Grandpa Arthur on fraud cases years earlier. "I hope you never need this," Grandpa said. "But if you do not rush to prove you are alive to the people who benefited from believing you were dead. Let the truth find them first." A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the snowstorm. "New," I whispered. "Not exactly," Margaret said. "But he feared enough to prepare." Detective Mercer leaned over the documents. "Can this investigation begin now?" Margaret nodded. "Technically, it already has." She pulled up an email thread. The moment Richard submitted an emergency succession request, the trust system automatically flagged it. Daniel Brooks was notified within minutes. "Where is he?" I asked. Margaret glanced at the clock. "On his way." Daniel arrived 40 minutes later wearing a dark wool coat dusted with snow and carrying a messenger bag that looked too worn for someone dealing with multimillion-dollar trusts. He was in his 40s, with tired eyes and a voice that stayed calm no matter what he was saying. He introduced himself, then turned to Detective Mercer. "I'll share anything relevant to a criminal investigation." Arthur Bennett anticipated overlap. That was the first time I realized Grandpa had not just protected the money. He had built a net around the truth. Daniel spread papers across the tray and began with the timeline. My parents had reported me missing at 6:12 a.m. They had filed the emergency notice with Margaret's office at 9:38. My father had contacted the trust's administrative board at 10:04. Lillian had given a statement at 10:27 claiming I had been unstable since the funeral. My mother had forwarded a scanned letter at 10:51, supposedly written by me, saying I felt overwhelmed by the trust and wanted Lillian to handle things if anything happened. I stared at the scan until the words blurred. "I didn't write that." Daniel didn't look surprised. "We know." "How?" "The trust required handwriting samples for key beneficiaries." Arthur insisted on it. Margaret gave the smallest sad smile. I called it paranoia with paperwork. Daniel pointed to the signature. "This is close, but not yours. The pressure pattern is wrong. The slant changes halfway through. Whoever copied it was good, not perfect." Detective Mercer's eyes narrowed. "That letter was submitted less than 5 hours after Avery supposedly disappeared." "Yes?" Daniel said. "Which is exactly the problem." He opened another page. The lodge had security cameras in the lobby and parking area. My father's sub was seen leaving at 1:14 a.m. during the height of the storm, even though my parents claimed all 4 of us had gone to bed before midnight. The vehicle returned at 2:03 a.m. Only 3 people entered the lodge afterward. My father, my mother Lillian. I stared at the still image on Daniel's laptop, 3 dark figures moving through snow. No one carrying me, no one looking panicked, no one calling for help. My family had walked back inside and slept while I froze. For the first time since waking up, anger pushed past fear. Quiet anger, clear anger, the kind that does not shake, the kind that remembers details. "What happens now?" I asked. Daniel closed the file. No, we let them keep talking. Detective Mercer frowned. You want Avery to stay hidden. For a short time, Daniel said. Only if she agrees and only if the hospital can protect her privacy. Legally. We do not need to announce she survived yet. Her parents do not know she was found. Margaret looked at me carefully. Avery, this is your choice. My first instinct was to call them, to scream, to demand that Lillian say my name and look me in the eye. But then I thought of my grandfather's video. Do not rush to prove you are alive to the people who benefited from believing you were dead. I looked at the paused image of my family returning to the lodge without me. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Let them believe I'm gone. Detective Mercer studied me. Are you sure? I nodded. If they think they won, they'll show us exactly what they were trying to win. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his expression changed. That didn't take long. What? I asked. He turned the screen toward us. It was an email from the trust board. Richard Bennett had requested an emergency meeting for the next morning to finalize Lillian's position as sole heir. Attached was a second document with my name at the bottom. Daniel enlarged the signature. My stomach turned. That's not mine either. No, he said quietly. But this one is worse. Margaret leaned closer. Why? Daniel tapped the date beside the signature. Because according to this, you signed away your objection to Lillian's succession 2 hours after you were left in the snow. The date beside my forged signature made the room go quiet in a way I will never forget. 2 hours after I was left in the snow, my family had already moved on to paperwork, not search parties, not emergency calls, not grief, paperwork. I stared at the document until the letters blurred together. My name was at the bottom, written in an almost perfect copy of my handwriting, giving up my right to object to Lillian stepping into my place. Whoever created it knew how I shaped my A. They knew I crossed my T slightly too low. They knew enough to fool someone who had never watched me sign my name in person. But my grandfather had. That was why the trust had samples. That was why Daniel caught it. Margaret touched the edge of the paper as if it were something dirty. Arthur was afraid of forged consent documents, she said. Told me people who want control rarely wait for permission. I looked at Daniel. Can that stop the meeting? It can slow it down, he said. But if we stop it too early, they'll know something is wrong. Detective Mercer folded her arms. I don't like using Avery as bait. Neither do I, Daniel said. That's why she won't be bait. The paperwork will be. I asked what that meant. He explained that the trust board had a process for suspicious succession claims. If Richard pushed forward every statement he made, every file he submitted, every attempt to pressure the board would become part of the investigation. The more confident he felt, the more careless he would be. My father had always been careful around people he considered powerful. But when he believed he had already won, he became arrogant. I had seen it at restaurants, at charity events, even at family dinners. He smiled less. He interrupted more. He said quiet things that sounded polite until you realized he was telling everyone the outcome had already been decided. Daniel wanted him in that version of himself. So I agreed to stay hidden. The hospital placed me under a privacy hold. Detective Mercer arranged for an officer outside the unit, not in uniform. Evelyn Monroe, my old college roommate and now an emergency physician at the same hospital, came to see me that afternoon after hearing my name from a trusted nurse. The moment she walked in, her face crumpled. Avery? She whispered. She crossed the room and hugged me so carefully I almost broke down. Evelyn had known my family just enough to dislike them politely. She used to say my mother could insult someone with a compliment and my father could make a room feel like a board meeting. When I told her what happened, she sat beside my bed with one hand over her mouth. They left you out there. I nodded. They think I'm dead. Her eyes hardened. Good. Let them keep thinking that. I almost laughed because Evelyn was the first person who said it like a normal human response. Not strategy. Not legal procedure. Just protective rage. She helped arrange a different name on my hospital door and made sure no visitor information went out. Meanwhile, Daniel and Margaret began building the net. They requested the lodge footage formally. They pulled call logs from the trust office. Detective Mercer sent officers to secure my townhouse before my family could empty it. That part came too late. By evening, she returned with photos. My front door had been opened with my own key. My filing cabinet was missing. My laptop was gone. The framed photo of Grandpa Arthur and me at my college graduation had been taken off the wall. For some reason, that was the thing that made me cry. Not the forged documents. Not the news interview. The empty space where that photograph had been. They took him too, I whispered. Margaret's voice was gentle. They took a frame, not what he left you. I wanted that to help. It did a little. Then Daniel showed me the first piece of footage from the lodge. The camera angle was grainy, pointed toward the side entrance. At 12:43 a.m., Lillian walked outside alone, carrying my beige wool coat over her arm. My coat. She looked around once, then placed it in the back of my father's SUV. 10 minutes later, my mother came out with my purse. My father followed with a duffel bag. At 1:14, all three of them left. Where am I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. In the cargo area. My stomach turned cold. Detective Mercer said they were working on warrants. Daniel clicked to another clip. This one came from the lodge lobby earlier that evening, before dinner. There was no sound at first, just Lillian standing near the front desk while my parents spoke with the manager. Then the manager handed over an envelope. Lillian opened it, removed something, and slipped it into her purse. What is that? I asked. We don't know yet, Daniel said. But look at her face. Lillian was smiling, not nervously, not reluctantly. Smiling like someone receiving a confirmation. I had spent my whole life explaining Lillian away. She was insecure. She was spoiled. She was used to being protected. She did not always understand consequences. But watching her on that screen, calm and pleased while preparing to erase me, I finally ran out of excuses. Then Daniel played one more file. This one had audio taken from a hallway camera near a service exit. My family stood in a small alcove, partly hidden behind a vending machine. My father's voice was low. After tomorrow, the board will have no choice. My mother said, I still think this is too fast. Lillian answered before my father could. Fast is the point. If we wait, Avery will find a way to make everyone worship her again. My mother murmured, She is your sister. Lillian's face twisted. She has been standing in my place since we were born. My father said, Nuff. You wanted what was yours. Now act like it. Lillian looked straight toward the hallway, not at the camera. But it felt like she was looking through the screen at me. She should have never been chosen. No one forced her. No one tricked her. My twin sister had not been carried along by our parents' greed. She had fed it. That was the moment my revenge stopped feeling like survival and became something colder, cleaner. Not revenge with screaming. Not revenge with threats. Truth. I wanted every lie they told to become another wall closing in around them. What do you need from me? I asked Daniel. He studied me for a second. Patience. I can do that. And strength. I looked back at Lillian on the frozen video frame. I've had practice. The next morning, Richard Bennett stood before the trust board in a private conference room downtown and spoke as though grief had made him noble. Daniel had arranged for us to watch from a secure video feed in Margaret's office. I sat in a borrowed sweater with a blanket around my shoulders, still weak, still bruised by cold, but alive. My father placed one hand over his chest and said, Avery would have wanted her sister to carry the family forward. Lillian lowered her eyes like a grieving angel. My mother dabbed at tears. Then Richard submitted one final sworn statement, claiming I had personally told him I wanted Lillian to become the sole heir if anything ever happened to me. Daniel paused the feed and looked at me. That is perjury. I kept my eyes on my father's face. Let him keep talking. So he did. He talked for 47 minutes. He lied about my mental state. He lied about our relationship. He lied about the trip. He lied about my grandfather. And with every sentence, the trap my grandfather built tightened around him. When the meeting ended, Lillian hugged my mother and laughed into her shoulder when she thought the room camera had turned off. It had not. Daniel saved the clip. Margaret closed her laptop and looked at me. Are you ready for the next step? I nodded. Let them celebrate tonight. My voice sounded different to me now. Not broken, not frightened. Tomorrow, they can meet the woman they tried to replace. By sunrise, my family believed they were one signature away from owning the future. I knew that because Daniel had the trust office forward every message my father sent after the emergency meeting. Richard Bennett did not write like a grieving father. He wrote like a man annoyed by delays. His first email arrived at 6:18 a.m. He wanted confirmation that Lillian's succession would be finalized before noon. His second came 12 minutes later, asking why the board still required redundant verification. His third copied two attorneys I had never heard of and warned that any delay would cause irreparable harm to the Bennett legacy. Margaret read that line aloud in her office and gave a tired little laugh. Your grandfather would have hated that phrase. I sat across from her wrapped in Evelyn's old gray cardigan, drinking coffee I could barely taste. My body still hurt from the cold, but my mind had become very clear. He thinks pressure works on everyone, I said. It usually has, Margaret replied. Daniel stood near the window, looking down at the street below. Not today. The plan was simple, but it had to be exact. The trust board would invite my father, mother, and Lillian to a final verification meeting. They would be told that one last review was required before Lillian could be confirmed as sole heir. They would not be told I was alive. Detective Mercer would be nearby with 2 officers. Daniel would present the flagged documents. Margaret would read the protective clause, and I would walk in only after my father committed himself fully, in front of everyone, on record. You don't have to be in the room, Evelyn told me when she came by before the meeting. You know that, right? I nodded. I know. You almost died 2 days ago. I remember. Her expression softened. That's exactly what worries me. I looked down at my hands. The fingertips were still red and tender. They told people I was dead while I was still trying to crawl through snow. Evelyn sat beside me. Then let the police handle it. They will. Avery. I looked at her. If I don't walk in, they'll turn me into paperwork again. A mistake, a technical issue. A victim other people speak for. My voice shook, but I kept going. I need them to see me breathing. Evelyn's eyes filled, but she nodded. Then make them look. At 10:30, we moved to the trust board's private conference level. Margaret put me in a small side office with frosted glass walls and a video monitor. I could see the conference room feed without being seen. The table was long, polished, and cold-looking, surrounded by people who had managed money for so long that they no longer reacted easily. My parents arrived first. My father wore a navy suit and a black tie. My mother wore pearls and grief like matching accessories. Lillian came last in a cream coat that looked almost identical to the one she had taken from my room months earlier and never returned. She looked beautiful. That made me angrier than it should have. Not because beauty mattered, but because she had always known how to look innocent in rooms where I had to look competent. My father shook hands with the board chair, Martin Vale, then sat at the head of the table without being invited. That was Richard. He entered every room searching for the largest chair. We appreciate your patience, Martin said. My father smiled tightly. Patience is difficult when my family is grieving and the trust's future is uncertain. Lillian lowered her eyes. Avery wouldn't have wanted all this conflict. My mother touched her hand. No, sweetheart. She wouldn't have. I almost stood right then. Daniel, watching beside me, said quietly. Not yet. The board began with basic questions. Where had we gone that weekend? What time did they last see me? What state was I in emotionally? My father answered smoothly. My mother added soft details. Lillian pressed tissues under her eyes. She was overwhelmed, Lillian said. Avery always acted strong, but the trust changed her. She became suspicious. Martin looked down at the file. Suspicious of whom? Lillian hesitated. My father answered for her. Of everyone. Daniel's mouth tightened. Good, he whispered. Let him say it. My father continued, painting a version of me that sounded unstable, paranoid, ungrateful. He said I had been fighting with the family for weeks. He said I had expressed regret about being named primary beneficiary. He said I wanted Lillian to handle the trust if anything happened because Lillian was more emotionally connected to the family. I stared at the screen, feeling something inside me crack and harden at the same time. My mother nodded through all of it. She did not look uncertain anymore. She looked committed. That hurt more than I expected. Martin turned a page. Mr. Bennett, did Avery sign this statement voluntarily? My father did not blink. Yes. In your presence? Yes. On the date listed? Yes. And you are prepared to swear under penalty of perjury that this document reflects your daughter's wishes. My father leaned back. Absolutely. Daniel picked up his folder. That's enough. Margaret stood beside him and straightened her jacket. I rose too, though my knees felt weak. Through the monitor, I watched Martin nod toward the door. Daniel entered first. Margaret followed. My father frowned, annoyed but not afraid. "What is this?" he asked. Daniel placed his folder on the table. "Final verification." Lillian shifted in her seat. My mother looked at Margaret. "Why are you here?" Margaret did not answer her. She faced the board. "Before any succession can be approved, I need to enter several items into the record." My father's smile vanished. "This is unnecessary." "It is required," Martin said. Daniel displayed the forged letter on the screen, then the signature comparison, then the lodge footage. My mother's face went gray when she saw herself carrying my purse through the side entrance. Lillian whispered, "Dad." My father raised one hand slightly, warning her to stop talking. Daniel moved through the evidence calmly. The sub leaving at 1:14 a.m., the return with only 3 visible passengers. The forged statement dated after I had disappeared. The emergency succession request filed less than 4 hours later. The video of Lillian in the alcove saying I should have never been chosen. No one in that room spoke for several seconds after that clip played. Then my father said, "This is being taken out of context." Daniel looked at him. "Which part?" My father's jaw flexed. "All of it." Margaret opened the trust binder. Arthur Bennett anticipated attempts to manipulate beneficiary succession under suspicious circumstances. Her voice was steady, but I knew her well enough to hear the anger beneath it. Section 14, paragraph C, authorizes immediate suspension of all transfer activity if fraud, coercion, concealment, or beneficiary endangerment is suspected. Lillian's face changed. For the first time, she did not look sad or elegant or wounded. She looked afraid. "Suspension." Margaret turned a page. "Pending investigation, any beneficiary or trustee found to have participated in such conduct may be removed permanently." My mother grabbed the table edge. "Permanently?" My father stood. "This is absurd. You cannot remove us based on speculation." Daniel looked toward the side door. "It is not speculation." That was my cue. I stepped into the doorway. For one strange second, I heard nothing. No gasps, no chair movement, no voices. Just the hum of the lights and the faint rush of blood in my ears. Then Lillian screamed. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. My father stared at me as if I were the one who had betrayed him by surviving. I walked into the room slowly. Every step hurt. I wanted that to show. I wanted them to see what their victory had cost. I stopped across from my father. "You were right about one thing?" I said. My voice was quiet, but the room carried it. By morning, there was only going to be one Heir. His face drained of color. I looked at Lillian. "It just wasn't going to be you." For the first time in my life, my father had no words. Richard Bennett had always believed he could talk his way through anything. A difficult client. An angry investor. A family argument. He had a voice people trusted before they realized they shouldn't. But as he stood across the conference table staring at me, all of that confidence disappeared. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. It was Lillian who spoke first. "No," she whispered. She stood so quickly her chair tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "No, that's not possible." I looked directly at her. "It is." My mother's knees seemed to give out beneath her. She dropped back into her chair, tears filling her eyes almost instantly. "Very," she said weakly. "Honey," I hadn't heard her call me honey in years, not sincerely. Not without wanting something afterward. It felt strange hearing it now, after she had watched me disappear into a snowstorm without turning back. Detective Mercer entered with 2 uniformed officers, closing the conference room door behind them. Nobody tried to leave. Nobody even looked toward the exit. Daniel calmly arranged the evidence into neat stacks while Margaret remained beside the trust board, her hands folded in front of her. Martin Vale broke the silence. "Ms. Bennett, would you like to make a statement before we continue?" I nodded. My hands were still shaking, but my voice wasn't. 3 nights ago, I trusted my family enough to get into my father's SUV. I looked from my mother to Lillian. I believed we were taking one last trip together before everything changed. My father finally found his voice. "Avery, don't." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You had your turn." He stopped talking. I continued. "I woke up alone in a snowstorm with no coat, no boots, no phone, and no way to call for help. I looked at every member of the trust board. While I was trying to stay alive, my parents were filing paperwork declaring me dead. The room stayed completely silent. Martin slowly folded his hands. Mr. Bennett, he said without looking away from me, do you dispute that statement? My father swallowed. My daughter is obviously traumatized. Do you dispute it? Martin repeated. Richard hesitated. The situation is more complicated than she's describing. Detective Mercer stepped forward. Fortunately, facts tend to simplify complicated situations. She placed another folder on the table. These are the preliminary findings from our investigation. She opened it one page at a time. Cell phone records placed my parents miles away from the lodge during the hours they claimed to be asleep. Tall cameras confirmed the vehicle's route. A forensic analysis of the thermos recovered from the lodge found traces of a prescription sedative. My father stared at the documents without touching them. My mother quietly began crying. Lillian looked back and forth between them like a frightened child waiting for someone else to fix everything. Detective Mercer turned another page. Yesterday afternoon, officers executed a search warrant at the Bennett residence. My father looked up sharply. You searched my house. We did. On what grounds? Attempted fraud involving the Bennett family trust and evidence connected to a suspicious disappearance. She removed several photographs from the folder. The first showed my missing purse inside a locked cabinet in my father's home office. The second showed my laptop beneath a blanket in the basement storage room. The third stopped everyone's breathing. My boots, covered with dried mud and road salt, hidden inside a large plastic storage bin behind old paint cans. My mother covered her face. She whispered. He didn't answer. Detective Mercer continued. Our forensic team also recovered deleted messages from Mrs. Bennett's tablet. My mother's head snapped up. What? Several messages had been erased shortly after Ms. Bennett was reported missing. Detective Mercer projected one of them onto the screen. It was a group conversation between my father, my mother, and Lillian. Richard, everything is finished. Elaine, what about Avery's phone? Lee and Dad already handled it. Nobody will ever find it. Another message appeared. Elaine, this feels wrong. Richard, it'll only feel wrong if someone talks. Then the final message. Lillian, tomorrow everything finally belongs to us. I closed my eyes for a second. Reading those words hurt less than hearing them spoken would have. Maybe because seeing them in black and white left no room for excuses. My father slowly pushed back his chair. This conversation proves nothing. Daniel looked almost amused. Actually, it proves quite a lot. He handed the board another document. Under Section 14 of the Bennett Family Trust, participation in fraud against another beneficiary results in immediate and permanent disqualification. Martin read the page carefully before nodding once. That language is very clear. My father stepped toward the board. Arthur never intended this clause to be used against his own family. Margaret looked directly at him. Arthur wrote this clause because of his own family. Richard's face hardened. Never trusted me. No. Margaret answered calmly. He didn't. That simple sentence seemed to hit him harder than every piece of evidence combined. For years, my father had convinced himself Grandpa Arthur simply misunderstood him. Hearing someone else confirm the truth stripped away the last illusion he had left. Lillian suddenly stood. Dad told us it would be temporary. Every head turned toward her. My father's eyes widened. Lillian. She ignored him. Tears streamed down her face. Said Avery would come back after a while. I stared at her. You believe that? She looked at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. I wanted to. Did you? I asked quietly. She couldn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. She hadn't asked where I would wake up. She hadn't asked if I would be safe. She had only asked when the trust would become hers. My mother suddenly stood and pointed at my father with trembling hands. This was your idea. Richard turned toward her in disbelief. Excuse me. You said no one would get hurt. Elaine. You told me she would be found. Her voice cracked as years of silence finally broke apart. You said someone would find her before morning. The room exploded into overlapping voices. Richard shouted back. Lillian cried that none of this was supposed to happen like this. My mother kept repeating, I believed you. I believed you. Detective Mercer raised one hand. Enough. The room immediately fell silent again. She looked first at Richard, then at Elaine, then at Lillian. Anything you say from this point forward may become part of an active criminal investigation. Nobody spoke after that. Martin Vale closed the trust binder and looked toward the rest of the board. They quietly discussed the matter for several minutes while the rest of us waited. Finally, he looked up. The Bennett Family Trust has reached a unanimous decision. My heartbeat quickened. Effective immediately, Richard Bennett is permanently removed as co-trustee. My father closed his eyes. Lane Bennett is also removed. My mother simply nodded through her tears. Lillian Bennett is permanently disqualified as a beneficiary under the trust. Lillian collapsed back into her chair. No, Martin continued. Control of the trust will remain temporarily under independent administration until MEMS. Avery Bennett is medically cleared to assume her responsibilities. I wasn't listening anymore. Not completely. Because my mother was looking at me in a way she never had before. Not with disappointment. Not with expectation. Not comparing me to Lillian. Just looking. I'm sorry, she whispered. The words hung between us. 28 years of excuses. 28 years of choosing one daughter over another. 28 years of asking me to give up just one more thing. And finally, 2 words. I wanted to feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. I'm sure you are, I said softly. But you didn't lose me today. I looked at all 3 of them before finishing. You lost me the night you watched me disappear into that storm. No one had an answer for that. People always imagine justice as a loud moment. A judge's gavel. Handcuffs clicking into place. Someone breaking down in tears. The truth is quieter than that. Justice usually begins with paperwork, signatures, and people finally being forced to tell the truth after running out of lies. 3 months passed before the criminal investigation officially ended. I spent the first 6 weeks recovering from the effects of hypothermia and the sedatives. Physical therapy helped my hands regain their strength, but some mornings my fingers still stiffened when the temperature dropped. My doctors told me that might happen for years. I didn't mind. It reminded me that I had survived. Detective Laura Mercer called me the day the prosecutor filed formal charges. Richard Bennett was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of forgery, filing false legal documents, obstruction of an official investigation, and several financial crimes uncovered during the trust audit. Elaine accepted a plea agreement after cooperating with investigators and admitting her role in preparing false paperwork. Lillian faced charges related to forged trust documents and fraudulent statements submitted to the board. None of them went to prison for the rest of their lives. Real life rarely works that way, but all 3 lost something they had spent years trying to protect. Their reputations, their influence, their place inside the Bennett legacy. News traveled quickly through our community. The same people who had attended my memorial service now stood outside the courthouse reading updates on their phones. Some apologized for believing the story my parents had told. I didn't blame them. They had trusted the family that raised me. They had no reason to imagine parents could invent a daughter's death for personal gain. Richard tried to fight every ruling. He appealed his removal as co-trustee. He challenged the validity of the trust. He even attempted to argue that Arthur Bennett had been mentally manipulated during the final revisions. Every attempt failed. Grandpa Arthur had documented everything. Every amendment, every meeting, every medical evaluation proving he was fully competent. In the end, the man my father called paranoid turned out to be the only one who truly understood what greed could do to a family. Elaine wrote me 4 letters. I read all of them once. The first blamed Richard. The second blamed fear. The third blamed herself. The fourth contained no excuses at all. It simply said, I spent so many years asking you to sacrifice for peace that I forgot peace built on sacrifice isn't peace at all. I folded that letter carefully and placed it inside a drawer. I never replied. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I eventually forgave her because carrying anger forever would have chained me to the worst night of my life. But forgiveness did not require another chance. Lillian tried contacting me dozens of times during those months, emails, voicemails, messages through mutual friends. I answered only once. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to see whether I still recognized the person who had shared my birthday for 28 years. She arrived early. She looked older than I remembered. Not because of time, but because disappointment had finally replaced entitlement. We sat across from each other in silence until she spoke. I was jealous of you my whole life. I nodded slowly. I know. Dad always said you thought you were better than me. Did you believe him? She stared into her coffee. It was easier than believing he was lying to both of us. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else she said. Because it was true. My father hadn't only manipulated me, he had manipulated her too. He convinced her that love was something siblings competed for, that winning mattered more than loyalty, that family was measured by inheritance instead of character. "Do you hate me?" she finally asked. I thought about the snowstorm, the security footage, the forged signatures, the smile she wore while believing I was gone forever. Then I surprised myself with the answer. "No." She looked up. "Really? I don't hate you?" I stood, placing a few dollars on the table for my untouched coffee. "But I don't trust you either. And those are two different things." That was the last conversation we ever had. The Bennett family trust remained under temporary independent management until the board unanimously confirmed me as its new supervising beneficiary. The role wasn't glamorous. It involved meetings, audits, scholarship committees, maintenance budgets, investment reviews, and far more spreadsheets than anyone would imagine. I loved every minute of it, not because it made me wealthy, because every decision reminded me why Grandpa Arthur had trusted me in the first place. One of the first resolutions I proposed had nothing to do with business. I established the Arthur Bennett Winter Safety Foundation, using a portion of the trust's annual investment income to fund emergency shelters, cold weather rescue equipment, and grants for rural search and rescue organizations across New England. At the first board meeting after the foundation launched, Margaret smiled at me across the table. "Arthur would be proud." I smiled back. "I hope so." Nearly a year after the storm, I drove to my grandfather's cabin alone. The property overlooked a frozen lake that was beginning to thaw with the first signs of spring. His old rocking chair still sat on the porch. The wind sounded softer there than I remembered. I carried two things with me: the final letter he had written, and the photograph my parents had stolen from my townhouse. Detective Mercer recovered it during the search of their house. The frame was scratched, but the picture survived. I placed it back where it belonged inside the cabin. Then I sat on the porch and read Grandpa's letter one more time. Near the end was a sentence I had somehow overlooked before. "If the day ever comes when protecting what is right costs you your place inside your own family, remember this: losing people who betray you is never the same as losing a home." I looked out across the lake for a long time after reading those words. I finally understood them. Home had never been the Bennett estate. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the family name. Home was the place where I no longer had to earn the right to exist. That spring, I planted 2 young maple trees near the edge of the property. One for the life I almost lost, one for the life I chose afterward. Every year since then, I've gone back to watch them grow. People sometimes ask whether I regret fighting my own family. I always answer the same way. I didn't fight my family. I fought the lies that destroyed it. Real family doesn't ask you to disappear so someone else can take your place. Real family doesn't measure love by inheritance papers or bank accounts. And if there's one thing my grandfather taught me, it's that the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind isn't wealth. It's the courage to protect the truth when everyone else is willing to sell it. So if you had been standing where I stood that day in the trust boardroom, looking into the eyes of the people who chose greed over their own daughter, what would you have done?